Knox Lab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Knox Lab Audio and our 5th Master Series. I do believe this is the 13th video in our 5th Master Series, Professional Sounding Results from Your Home Studio. And this will be the second video that we'll be talking about microphone concerns. So hang on just a second and let's take a look at the second phase of dealing with our microphone concerns. Okay, so if you've taken everything into consideration that we talked about in the last video, the next thing that we have to deal with is what's the difference between a cheap microphone and an expensive one? The simple answer is that a more expensive microphone has been engineered better and differently. So you get some people that have a lot of expensive microphones in a lot of big studios, because just because one expensive microphone is an expensive microphone does not mean that's the microphone they'll choose for this person that's singing or this capture that they're working on, because they have different characteristics. So no matter whether or not you're dealing with inexpensive microphones or one of the most expensive microphones, that you're going to run into that there are different characteristics that are going to affect your capture. So that whenever you're dealing with that, let's say this is my AT 2020 that I just love this little microphone. It's a very inexpensive microphone. But all the stuff that's talking about in its specifications is going to dictate its effect on what you're trying to capture. So whether or not you have an expensive microphone or an inexpensive microphone, being able to compensate or adjust for its limitations or differences is paramount, and you being able to have good captures and being able to edit and process them properly so that it sounds like professional sounding results that you want. So the understanding there is both those sides, it's a pertinent argument and a topic. For a lot of home studio people or small professional studios or semi-professional, is that a lot of time we have less inexpensive microphones. So we really want to look at, how do I compensate for that? So I don't worry so about it. I've dealt with all that other stuff. How do I compensate for its limitations? And if you have more expensive microphones that say that you can only afford one expensive microphone, so it's going to affect you. You may not want the exact effect on every capture and every situation, so you want to be able to adjust for or change or augment it. So this video is going to be dealing with that. So whether or not you have an expensive microphone that you need to adjust for a certain type of capture that you're working with, but you don't have another microphone to work with that works well, or you have a more inexpensive microphone that you can make it sound like it was captured with by a nice expensive microphone, and you can do adjustments to it to make it sound as well as possible for the situation to get as professional sounding results as you can. So let's get on to dealing with this issue and some solutions to the issue. Okay, before we get into looking at things like a lot of correctiveness to try to achieve sounds that you want with your microphone, first let's look at limitations and the most important things you need to focus on. So this is my AT 2020 microphone. This is a fairly inexpensive microphone, but it's a great little microphone if I correct for its issues and its limitations. So whenever you start looking at the most important things that I think you should look at, you want to start out with the frequency response when looking at specifications. The human ear can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So you're fine here. You have got 20 to 20,000 hertz, you're good to go there. So the next thing we want to look at is, the maximum input level. You've got 144 dB SPL. So any above 120 dB is painful and can cause ear damage. So anything 120 dB and above is very much, I can't see why you're going to be wanting to go there, so there's no point to it. But it will record up stuff that's that loud, which I don't really recommend. There's no point to it, so you're good to go there. Dynamic range from the noise floor and the self noise of the microphone, that you're going to want to have that be up to about 120 dB. 120 dB is plain threshold, and there's not much point going above that. So you got 124 dB here, you are fine. So there's no issues there with this very inexpensive microphone. The issue we come to first of all, and these most important issues, is the frequency response. If you look here, it's got a boost in the upper end and then a direct cutoff before 20K. In the lower end, it's got a dip here and a boost here below this, which means it's basically like giving a pretty high boost in the upper end, which makes it going to sound a little brittle and a lot of high-end issues, because it's like putting a high-end EQ on there and boosting it up, which is going to be a problem. So you're going to want to compensate with that. If you remember when we looked at dealing with our environmental concerns, that we put on Sonar Works. So we have this frequency response in blue of the room, and the green is corrective EQ dealing with the frequency response to attain a flat frequency response of the room. And you can do that with an EQ dealing with the frequency response of your microphone. You've got a boost here in the upper end and it drops off sharply. I've reversed mimicked that on this EQ, and on the lower end, this dip and that little boost, I reversed that on here. So I have a reversal of that frequency response on this EQ to compensate for the frequency response problem of the microphone trying to attain a flat frequency response. I can put this on the track that compensates for it, that I can adjust a little bit, because it might not be an issue on certain captures with certain instruments in certain situations, but that's attaining a flat frequency response. Or I can just put it on the input when I capture and flatten the frequency response right there. Those issues are dealt with. So basically, those are the most important things what you're looking at. Sometimes you might get microphones, like I got this dynamic microphone from Sennheiser that does not have a dynamic range here. So there is no dynamic range specified. So you basically, dynamic range on fairly inexpensive microphones, even one like this, are pretty good. Stuff is built pretty good nowadays, and if you can't find any information in that, you just got to have to go from recommendations that people that are using it for a wide range of dynamic situations. Normally a lot of these dynamic microphones are used for live performances, and they can just cut through the mix and work very well, whereas something like a microphone like this condenser microphone is going to pick up everything, bro. It's not going to work for a live situation. So in a more controlled atmosphere, a condenser microphone is a much better situation, but sometimes you want to use a dynamic microphone that just sounds good. It's got a little bit different sound, so you want to go with it. But those are the most important things we want to deal with. Let's get on at looking at some of the other specification things that we want to look at whenever dealing with our microphones. Okay, the next thing we talk about the polar pattern. Now, I had recommended that the cardioid, supercardioid, hypercardioid is my recommendation most of the time, because it's more directed where you want it to be facing instead of trying to capture room ambience, but that can be different in different situations. But we get on to like the sensitivity. Whenever you're looking at the sensitivity in active microphones, like a condenser, is a little different than a dynamic phone like the other one I'll show you in a minute. But when we're looking at these numbers, like you've got a negative number here and a regular number. What all this other stuff means, you're gonna have to read about that a little bit. But basically, like with an active microphone like this and a condenser microphone, that you'll have a positive number between 8 and 32. Right here we have a number of 14. So between those two numbers going up, we're pretty good. And when we're dealing with negative numbers here, that we're dealing with between minus 40, 42, and minus 30, or sometimes a little bit more there. So between there and going up, closer to 0 is better. So basically in this microphone, we're closer to 40 here, and we're pretty good. Whenever we're dealing with a dynamic microphone, that on the dynamic microphone, it's normally somewhere in a positive number, it's between 1 and 6. So say between 3 and 6, you're pretty good. So you're probably pretty good to go here. One of the reasons dynamic microphones get used, they're a little less sensitive. And so that is something to keep in mind whenever you're using them. On a negative number, it would be like minus 60 to minus 44 or something like that. Between there and then going closer to 0 is better. So you're pretty good to go there. I mean, this is a $99 to $200 microphone, both of these microphones. So you're actually pretty good to go here on the sensitivity. So let's get on to the next thing we should look at. Okay, the next thing we talk about is impedance. So basically, any professional microphone that deemed low impedance would be between 50 ohms and 600 ohms. So we're looking at this Sennheiser microphone. We've got 350 ohms. We're great there. We go to our AT2020, we've got 100 ohms, which is really good. So anything between 150 and 200 ohms normally is deemed pretty dang good. So we're really good there. So let's look at the next spec. Okay, the next one we come to is self-noise of the microphone and signal-to-noise ratio. So remember that these tests are taking at 94 dB, I do believe. So basically what happens is you have the signal-to-noise ratio is 94 dB minus the self-noise of the microphone. And a good self-noise of the microphone is 15 dB, supposed to be dBA SPL, and below. So we've got a 20 dB SPL here, which is a little bit high, but it's not ridiculous. So we've got a signal to noise ratio at 74. 79 or so is pretty good. So we're actually pretty good here. You know, 79 is a kind of a target. If it gets too far below that, it's starting to get too much. If this is like 30 or something like that, it'd be kind of ridiculous. And in some microphones, you get like my dynamic microphone, it has no rating on that anywhere. So it more than likely hasn't been taken into consideration. And dynamic microphones, normally, it's not as big of an issue because they're used for less sensitive environments. And sometimes you use them to more transient, attacks that you want to tame with a dynamic microphone, or not capture a lot of things going on in the atmosphere, so you might not have to worry about it that much. But we're pretty good there, between a $99 and $200 microphone on this condenser, which we're probably using most of the time. We're pretty good to go there. So let's look at the next specification. Okay, so we've dealt with our specification issues. One thing you'll come into is that with this, even with this AT2020, that you are probably pretty good to go. It's not going to cause you issues with getting professional sounding results with even the, we dealt with the frequency response. The other things aren't going to really cause you too much of a problem. When we get into like this dynamic microphone, you will see that we have a low end cutoff. So we've only got from 40 hertz, and we've got an upper end cutoff because we've only got 16,000 hertz. So if you're trying to catch really upper end stuff or really lower end stuff, you might want to switch to your condenser microphone and go with that. And also remember that the dynamic microphone have a little bit different sound, and it really doesn't, it's less sensitive basically, and you will find that it's great for some applications and things that are have a hard impact. So kind of keep that in mind. But when we start talking about the difference between that and like a $10,000 microphone here from Sony, that we've basically dealt with the specifications and talked about the issues that are a problem and have worked that out to we're fine trying to get professional sounding results. If we did what we did in the last video and you take into consideration things we talked about in this video, you're probably pretty good to go. Does that make sense? Now, we'll talk in the next video why you'd want to have a $10,000 microphone, because there are things like noise inherent in the system, saturation, harmonic content, and equalization that cause it to sound like a $10,000 microphone that you can make your inexpensive microphone sound like, and also make it sound like different $10,000 microphones, and why some engineers will have 2, 3, 10, 15, $10,000 microphones, because on Bob, he wants this $10,000 microphone. Sounds great. On Tammy, he wants this different $10,000 microphone because it sounds better with her voice. Or in this studio, in this environment. So it's an audio engineering thing you got to think about. But basically for us, most of the time, that we're going to look at dealing with that issue in the next video so that we can compensate and adjust. So peace, self-love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video on dealing with microphone concerns, and I will see you in the next video.